Welcome to the It Is Written podcast. As doubts about God's will arise, the world resorts to feelings and experts. We go to the law and to the testimony of God's Word. In today's episode, we will be in Genesis chapters 1 through 5. In these opening Bible chapters, God tells us about the origins of the world, sin, pride, and even murder. But included in these chapters is a series of sevens that pair together to make an interesting point. Is God intentionally showing us that He is a God of pattern and repetition? Or is it a mere coincidence that these chapters have so much structure and order?
Genesis 1:1 says, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. But in the beginning the earth was without form, it was empty, and it was dark. By executive decree God changed that whole affair." Psalm 33 verse 6.
The heavens were made by the word of the Lord, and all the stars by the breath of His mouth. He gathers the water of the sea into a heap. He puts the depths into storehouses.
In verse 9.
For He spoke, and it came into being. He commanded, and it came into existence.
God's word is supreme. He spoke the words, and the whole universe was created. It's amazing. And in fact, in verse 16, He says that He made the stars also. Almost like it sounded like an afterthought. Oh yeah, and He made some stars. You realize how many stars there are?
A lot. I don't even know what the number is. What is it?
About 400 billion in our galaxy.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I'm sure they're saying there's even more
and about
now.
170 billion galaxies.
Wow.
And all that. And God just kind of did that as an afterthought, it looks like.
He placed them where He wanted them.
Yes.
Yeah.
He's totally in charge. He created the whole universe. And He saw that it was good. And then He created man. And He saw that man needed a help suitable to him. No other creature fulfilled that role, so He created Eve to be a companion to Adam, to be married and kind of set the pattern for the family life that He expected. But He put them in the garden, and the garden was wonderful. They had an abundance of fruit from all these trees that they could eat, and it was just well watered and well provided for. But there was one tree that God said they could not eat of. And Satan came along and suggested that should be the one they want. How do we feel when we get prohibited from doing something?
It kind of makes us want it more.
Yeah, wonder why He doesn't want us to have it. And they start looking at it, she does especially. It wasn't like she was hungry. Abundant provision. But that one, what is there about that one? And so she finally takes it and eats it and gives it to her husband, and he eats. God will have to sacrifice His Son before the verbs take and eat are associated with salvation. Quite a contrast. And so man, once he realized what He'd done, think about some of the things he did to try to deal with it. They tried to cover it up. They tried to hide. They tried to shift the blame. And none of that really worked. They were ordered out of the garden by God, and they lost the access to the tree of life that would have caused them to live forever. And they lost their fellowship with God. They lost their relationship with God. Now they had children. They had Cain and Abel particularly. And you remember that Cain was upset because Abel's offering was accepted by God and Cain's himself was not. And as a result of that, Cain killed Abel. Now I want you to notice the comparisons between the two.
Sure.
In 3:9, what does God ask Adam and Eve?
Where are you?
And in 4:9, what does He ask Cain?
Where is your brother
He
Abel?
asked the big where question. And in 3:13, what does He ask the woman?
What have you done?
And in 4:10, what does He ask Cain?
What have you done?
Yeah, you see how parallel they are? Both of them receive a curse. Both of them are expelled toward the east. But here's the difference. Cain's was not just a rerun of the fall. Things were going from bad to worse. Eve had to be talked into her sin by Satan. Cain wasn't to be able to be talked out of his sin by even the Lord as he appealed to him before he killed his brother. And he just went to pieces over the punishment as well, whereas Adam and Eve accepted their punishment, Cain didn't. So what you start seeing is that the world is going from bad to worse. Adam and Eve sinned, Cain sinned, and it just keeps going in that cycle. So I want you to think about something that's a real common factor throughout the Bible, but especially in Genesis, and we're going to apply this here in a minute. There's a lot of sevenness in the book of Genesis, in these early chapters. 7 days of creation. 6 days of creation, and the seventh day he rested. There were 7 times it said it was good, and not even corresponding necessarily to those 7 days, but 7 times it said that. In the Cain and Abel narrative, the name Cain is found 14 times, Abel 7 times. They're called brothers 7 times. There are some more impressive, subtle multiples of 7 as well. The first section, the creation section, goes from chapter 1, verse 1 to chapter 2, verse 3. In that section, the name of God is found 7 times 5 times, 35 times. And in the first major division, from 2:4 to 4:26, the name of God is found 35 times. The 70th time God's name is found is in chapter 4, verse 26, where men began to call upon the name of the Lord. So you have just a lot of emphasis on sevenness. But I want you to notice one particular thing. He gives us the genealogies of Cain and of Seth. And when you count down the genealogy of Cain, in fact, you can think about this in starting in 4:17. You've got Adam, Cain, and then in 17, who's Cain's son?
Cain's son is Enoch.
Enoch. Who's Enoch's son in verse 18?
Irad.
Irad. And his son?
Mehuel.
Mehuel or something like that. I don't know. And his son?
Methusael.
And his son?
As then Lamech.
That would be the 7th. Lamech was the 7th. And notice Lamech. Read verses 19 to 24.
Lamech took 2 wives for himself, one named Ada and the other named Zillah. Ada bore Jabal. He was the first of the nomadic herdsmen. His brother was named Jubal. He was the first of all who played the lyre and flute. Zillah bore Tubal-Cain, who made all kinds of bronze and iron tools. Tubal-Cain's sister was Naamah. Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice. Wives of Lamech, pay attention to my words. For I killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain is to be avenged 7 times over, then for Lamech it will be 77 times.
Lamech was quite the character. You know, he's kind of bragging about the fact he killed this guy for hitting him. You know, this is the first case in which crime was sort of venerated by the culprit. He's proud of it. Kind of a sense of badge of honor almost for him. He has unending revenge. And so he's the 7th through Cain is Lamech. Now let's think about who the 7th is through Seth. That's from chapter 5. You've got Adam, number 1, then Seth. Then who's Seth's son in 5:9?
Enosh.
And his son?
Kenan.
And then in 12, his son?
Mahalalel.
And then his son in verse 15? Jared. And then his son in verse 21?
In verse 21, we get to Methuselah.
Enoch. Yeah,
Enoch, okay.
Enoch, yeah.
Oh, and then he fathered Methuselah.
That's right.
Okay.
So Enoch is the 7th on Seth's line. Now, the 7th from Cain's line was Lamech, who was a disaster. The 7th in Seth's line is Enoch, where you find out in verse 22, Enoch walked with God 300 years after he became the father of Methuselah, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Enoch walked with God, and he was not because God took him.
Exactly 7 generations after Lamech.
Yes. And we know we're right about that because Jude mentions that he was the 7th from Adam.
Oh, okay.
So he specifically is mentioned in the Bible as being the 7th.
Yeah.
Here, the 7th is the one that was taken directly to be with the Lord on Seth's side. 7th on Cain's side was the one who venerated his crime and was proud of it. And so you see, and another thing, if we actually wrote down the lists, there are 2 names that are in both lists, Lamech and Enoch. So there's just a lot of things that really show he's demonstrating that the worldly lineage of Lamech was just a disaster. The godly line that was through Seth, where they called upon the name of the Lord in chapter 4, verse 26, the 7th was Enoch. And Enoch, as you pointed out, gave birth to Methuselah, who was the oldest man who ever lived, at least as far as we can tell. And then he gave birth to Lamech in verse 26. This Lamech was the father of Noah. But I want you to notice, and you can read 5:31.
So Lamech's life lasted 777 years, then he died.
Yeah, those things can't just be coincidental. And what I'm suggesting in this is that God is a God of pattern. He likes sevenness. Seven's all over the Bible. It kind of becomes God's number. And you can see that there's sevens woven into this that you would never even think about. And that clearly show much design, much purpose, much planning. And the Bible is written by men over a long period of time, by many different men, and yet seven is emphasized in almost every book of the Bible. And so you start thinking about that and you realize God's got his signature in all kinds of places that we wouldn't even have noticed it unless we had just really started analyzing and seeing the emphasis on the number seven. So I just thought those were some interesting things about those first chapters in Genesis.
Yeah. Someone once pointed out to me, and now it makes sense. So Jesus, he would be the descendant of Enoch, obviously, or Noah. All of us are. Right. Not from Lamech, the one who said, I'll avenge 70 times.
Not that Lamech. Yeah,
right.
That's right.
It's really cool in Matthew 18 when Jesus is asked, how many times shall I forgive my brother? Up to 7 times by Peter. What would Jesus say? No, I say unto you up to 70 times 7.
Yeah.
I've heard some people draw it back to this, that maybe Jesus is kind of making an allusion back to the Lamech in 23 and 24 who said, I'll avenge 70 times 7. Jesus saying, no, my line, forgive 70 times 7.
Unending revenge versus unending forgiveness.
Right. And so I thought that was a helpful point for someone to point out to me once.
Yes. So what you see just continues to cause you to glorify God more and more. As we look at any passage in the Bible, you see God standing out and God doing things that are just impossible for human beings. He spoke the world into existence. He created pattern and form and filled it, and he did everything so well.
Thank you for listening to the It Is Written podcast. We'd like to remind everybody, if you're enjoying what you're hearing, please leave us a review on your preferred listening platform. We would love to use this as an opportunity to reach others who want to hear God's Word. We would also like to remind everybody that there is also a video component to this. Feel free to check us out on YouTube. It Is Written, Gary Fisher and Chase Byers. And if you have any questions or comments for future episodes, feel free to send Gary an email at garyfisher1063@gmail.com. We hope you have a blessed day.